False pages. Uncover hidden history and untold truths.
In the history of human conflict, wars have lasted years, decades, even centuries. The 100 Years' War lasted 116 years. The 30 Years' War tore Europe apart for 3 decades. The First World War killed 20 million people over 4 years of industrialized slaughter. And then there is the Anglo-Zanzibar War of 1896, which lasted 38 minutes. This is not a joke. This is not a legend. This is an officially documented military conflict between the British Empire and the Sultanate of Zanzibar that began at 9:02 in the morning and ended at 9:40. One side lost hundreds of men. The other side lost exactly 1 sailor. But here's what makes this story genuinely fascinating and deeply uncomfortable. The 38 minutes are almost irrelevant. What matters is everything that happened before those 38 minutes. Because this wasn't just the shortest war in history. It was one of the most naked, unashamed displays of imperial power ever recorded. And the way it ended tells you everything about how the British Empire actually worked. Let's go back to August 25, 1896. Zanzibar was a small island sultanate off the east coast of Africa, extraordinarily wealthy from its position as the center of the Indian Ocean spice and slave trade. It was also, officially, a British protectorate, meaning Britain didn't technically own it, but had enough political and military influence to control who ran it. On August 25th, the pro-British Sultan of Zanzibar, Hamad bin Thuwaini, died suddenly. The circumstances of his death were suspicious. There were whispers of poison, but nothing was ever proven. Within hours, his cousin Khalid bin Bargash had seized the palace and declared himself the new sultan. There was just one problem. According to a treaty signed in 1886, any new sultan of Zanzibar required British approval before taking power. Khalid had not asked for approval. He had not even informed the British. He had simply taken the palace, raised his flag, and begun gathering an army. The British consul in Zanzibar, Basil Cave, sent Khalid a message. It was polite, it was firm, it said, in essence, "You do not have permission to be sultan. Stand down immediately." Khalid refused, and here is where the story gets extraordinary, because while Khalid was refusing, the British were moving. Within 24 hours of the Sultan's death, 3 British warships had positioned themselves in Zanzibar harbour. Their guns were aimed directly at the palace. A 4th and 5th ship arrived shortly after. Khalid, watching the warships arrive, did not stand down. He gathered approximately 2,800 soldiers and palace guards. He positioned an ancient artillery piece, a bronze cannon that had been decorative for decades, on the palace grounds. He had a royal yacht, the HHS Glasgow, which he armed and anchored in the harbour. He was, by any rational military calculation, preparing to fight the British Empire with a decorative cannon and a yacht. The British gave him until 9:00 a.m. on August 27th to surrender. At 9:00 a.m., Khalid had not surrendered. At 9:02 a.m., the British opened fire. What followed was less a battle than a demonstration. The British warships fired on the palace with precision and without pause. The palace walls, which had been built for appearance rather than defense, collapsed almost immediately. The ancient artillery piece fired once, hitting a British ship with no significant damage, before being destroyed. The HHS Glasgow, Khalid's armed yacht, was sunk within minutes. Its crew, who were drowning in the harbour, had to be rescued by the British sailors who had just sunk their ship. By 9:40 a.m., 38 minutes after the first shot was fired, Khalid's flag had been shot down from the palace roof. His forces had collapsed. Somewhere between 500 and 570 of his men were dead or wounded. The palace was in ruins. The British suffered 1 wounded sailor. Khalid himself did not die. He fled through the chaos and took refuge in the German consulate. Germany and Britain were rivals in East Africa, and the Germans were happy to embarrass the British by sheltering him. He lived in exile for years before eventually being captured, exiled to St. Helena, and finally allowed to return to East Africa, where he died in 1927. The new Sultan, approved by Britain, was installed the same afternoon. Now here's the part of the story I want you to really sit with. Khalid bin Bargash is sometimes portrayed as a fool. a man who genuinely believed he could fight the British Empire with 2,800 men and a decorative cannon. But was he actually wrong to try? Consider what he was facing. If he surrendered without resistance, he would be removed from power immediately and replaced with a British-approved ruler. His country would continue to be a protectorate, politely controlled, quietly stripped of real sovereignty. Surrendering meant accepting that outcome without even making his objection visible. By fighting, even for 38 minutes, even with a decorative cannon, he forced the British to fire on a palace. He made the violence visible. He made the empire show its hand openly, in front of the entire world, in a way that a quiet diplomatic removal would never have done. The 38-minute war was reported in newspapers across Europe and America. People who had never heard of Zanzibar now knew that Britain had destroyed a sultan's palace in under an hour because he hadn't asked permission to take power. Whether that was Khalid's intention or simply the accidental result of a desperate gamble, we'll never know. What we do know is this: the Anglo-Zanzibar War became a symbol for later independence movements across Africa of exactly what colonialism looked like when it dropped the pretense of partnership and showed what was underneath. The 38 minutes that ended a war also, eventually, helped end an empire. History doesn't always remember the winners. Sometimes it remembers the 38 minutes it took to reveal exactly who the winners were, and what they were willing to do to stay that way. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and if there's a moment in history you think deserves this kind of closer look, tell me below. Subscribe to False Pages because the history you were taught was missing something, and we're going to find it.